Rain fell softly over the mountain village of Kiyomizu. The sky was gray and heavy, and the streets were quiet. But inside the small dojo at the edge of the village, whispers filled the air, because something unbelievable was about to happen, and everyone could feel it in their hearts. They said the greatest swordsman in all of Japan was coming to their village that very day. His name was Hayato, and his sword was said to move faster than the wind, faster than thought, faster than death itself. People called him the Demon Blade, not because he was evil, but because no one could ever defeat him, and those who tried never forgot his eyes, cold, sharp, and full of fire. For weeks the story had spread from one town to another that Master Hayato was traveling across the land looking for a final opponent. He had fought generals, he had faced masters, he had cut through warriors of every style and every school, and still no one could touch him. Now they said he was coming to the Kiyomizu dojo to find one last challenge before he gave up his sword forever. Inside the dojo, the students were cleaning the floor, their hands shaking as they talked about the rumor. One boy whispered, "What if he really comes here?" Another said, "We must tell Master Renji to come back from the mountains," but the master was gone and no one knew when he would return. All they had was the quiet caretaker, a woman named Aiko, who swept the floors and served tea every day. Aiko was gentle and calm. She spoke little. She smiled. Softly, she bowed to everyone. She seemed like no one special, the kind of person who could disappear into the background. Yet there was something strange about her eyes when she looked at the training hall. It was as if she was remembering something, long forgotten, something she once lost. The sound of footsteps echoed outside the dojo. The sliding door opened and the wind blew in, carrying with it the scent of rain and steel. A tall man stood there, his black robe dripping, his sword at his side. His gaze piercing through the air. The students froze and every heart began to pound. It was him. Hayato, the greatest swordsman of Japan. His voice was deep, calm, yet filled with power. "I have come for a duel," he said, his eyes sweeping across the trembling students. "Where is your master?" One of the boys bowed low. "Our master is away for training. He will return next week. Please forgive us, but we have no one worthy to face you." Hayato's expression did not change. His eyes fell on Aiko, who was quietly sweeping near the corner, her old broom moving slowly across the wooden floor. "Who is she?" he asked. Aiko looked up only for a moment before bowing. "I am just a servant," she said. "I take care of the dojo while the master is away." Hayato stepped closer, his boots wet against the floor. "Then I will fight you," he said. The students gasped in shock. One shouted, "No, she is not a fighter." Another cried, "Please, master, do not harm her." But Hayato only smiled, a cold, thin smile. "A true warrior accepts any challenge," he said. "She stands here. She holds a broom. She can hold a sword too." Aiko stayed still for a long moment. The rain outside grew louder. The students held their breath. Finally she spoke in a quiet voice. "If you insist." The room fell silent. Not even the rain seemed to move. Everyone looked at her in disbelief. Had she just agreed to fight the greatest swordsman in Japan? Aiko placed the broom aside and walked slowly toward the center of the dojo. Her bare feet made no sound. Her movements were calm, almost too calm, the students whispered. "She does not know what she is doing. This is madness." But none of them dared stop her. Hayato untied his sword. The blade gleamed even in the dim light. It was beautiful and deadly. He pointed it toward her and said, "I will not go easy on you." Woman Aiko bowed low, her face unreadable. "I do not ask you to," she replied. Something in her tone made Hayato pause. It was not fear. It was not pride. It was something deeper, something that reminded him of the silence before a storm. He felt a strange chill inside him as he looked at her. This woman who was no warrior, this woman who held no weapon, and yet faced him without trembling. The students stepped back, pressing against the walls. The air inside the dojo felt heavy, as if the whole world was waiting to see what would happen next. Outside, thunder rumbled across the mountains. Lightning flashed for a brief moment, and in that flash, Hayato thought he saw something in Aiko's eyes, a faint spark, like steel, meeting steel. He did not know why, but he suddenly felt unsure. This was supposed to be a simple fight. a meaningless test of skill before he ended his journey. But now it felt different, as if something unseen was about to change. His fate. Aiko reached up to the wall where the old practice swords hung and took one in her hand. The wood was worn and smooth with age. She brushed the dust away gently and held it with both hands. Her posture simple yet balanced, her eyes calm like still water. Hayato raised his blade ready to strike, but for the first time in years he hesitated. He could not explain it. This woman, this ordinary woman, felt strangely dangerous. Not because of strength, but because of peace. A gust of wind blew through the open door. The candles flickered. The shadows danced across the walls, and for one brief second time itself seemed to stop. Then Aiko whispered softly, "Let us begin," and with that, the duel between Japan's greatest swordsman and an ordinary woman began beneath, the sound of falling rain in the watching eyes of destiny. The dojo was quiet except for the sound of rain outside the roof dripping softly while everyone stood frozen, their hearts beating faster than the falling water, every pair of eyes locked on the two figures standing face to face in the middle of the room. Hayato, the greatest swordsman in Japan, and Aiko, the woman who was never known to fight anyone. No one dared to speak. They only watched as Hayato drew his sword slowly, the steel shining with a cold light, the kind that made even brave men shiver. The students pressed themselves against the walls, afraid that one wrong move might draw his attention. Hayato looked calm, but his eyes were sharp like blades themselves. His voice, low and deep. "You may take the first move," he said, but Aiko only bowed her head. She did not move, she did not even blink. She stood holding the wooden sword lightly in her hands, her breath slow, and even her eyes calm, as if she was not standing before death itself for a moment. Hayato felt a strange unease. He had fought hundreds of warriors before. He had faced strong men, fierce fighters, and fearless masters. But never someone like her. Never someone so still, so quiet, so unreadable. The sound of thunder rolled across the sky. Hayato lifted his sword higher. His muscles tense, he waited for her to flinch, to tremble, to step back, but she did nothing. The air between them felt heavy. Almost alive, the students whispered to each other. "What is she doing? She is going to die," one said. But another shook his head. "No, look at her eyes, they are not afraid." Hayato finally stepped forward. His movement fast like lightning. His blade flashing through the air, he aimed straight for her shoulder. A strike. That would end the fight before it even began. The student screamed, but Aiko moved just as the blade came near her. She leaned slightly to the side. The edge missed her by less than the width of a leaf. Hayato stopped in surprise. He turned quickly, and struck again, faster this time. But she moved again, her feet gliding across the floor as if she was floating his sword. Cut through air again and again, but never touched her. The dojo echoed with the sharp sound of his blade slicing nothingness. Aiko's wooden sword had not moved, she had not even raised it. Sweat formed on Hayato's brow. He was not tired, but confused. His strikes were perfect, his timing flawless, yet she avoided every single one. How could a woman with no training read his moves so easily? He tightened his grip and attacked with full power, his sword roaring through the air like a storm. The wind from his swings knocked over candles and sent papers flying, but Aiko remained untouched. Her expression calm, her breathing steady. The students could hardly believe what they were seeing. Some covered their mouths. Others fell to their knees, whispering prayers. "This cannot be real." One muttered, "She must be blessed by spirits." Another said. But deep inside, they all felt something. More than fear, they felt awe, pure and silent. Hayato's anger began to rise. He felt his pride burning within him. How could a servant humiliate him like this? He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Enough, fight me for real." But Aiko only looked at him and said softly, "You have already lost something. You just do not see it yet." Her voice was gentle but carried deep strength, the kind that made even the strongest warrior hesitate. For a moment, Hayato froze. Her words echoed in his mind. He did not understand what she meant, but they cut through him sharper than any sword he had ever faced. He raised his blade once more, ready to strike with all his power, but suddenly she moved for the first time. It was not fast, It was not loud. It was simple. One step forward, her wooden sword lifted lightly, and before he could blink, he felt a small tap on his wrist. The pain was sharp but not deep. His sword slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. The sound rang through the dojo like thunder, and then there was silence. No one moved, no one breathed. Hayato looked down at his empty hand, unable to believe what had just happened. He tried to move, but could not. It was as if the air itself held him in place. Aiko lowered her sword and bowed. "Respectfully, the fight is over," she said. The students gasped. Some cried out in disbelief. Others dropped to their knees. How could this be the greatest swordsman in all of Japan, defeated by a woman who never trained, who never fought anyone before? Hayato looked at her. His pride shattered his mind spinning. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He could only stare at her face, calm and peaceful, as if she had done nothing unusual. Outside, the rain began to pour harder. Lightning flashed across the sky for a moment, illuminating Aiko's figure. She stood straight, her wooden sword resting gently in her hand, her eyes looking at the floor, as if she carried no victory at all. Hayato finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Who are you?" he asked, but she only smiled faintly and said, "Someone who has no reason to fight anymore." Then she turned and began to walk toward the back of the dojo, her steps quiet, her presence fading like mist after a storm. The students slowly gathered around Hayato, afraid yet full of wonder, their voices low and trembling. "Master, what happened?" one asked. "How did she defeat you?" Hayato did not answer. He bent down, picked up his sword, and looked at the blade. It was wet not from blood, but from rain that had drifted in through the open door. He realized then that his greatest battle was not against her, but against himself. He watched her disappear through the paper doors and whispered to himself, "She is no ordinary woman," and from that moment the legend of Aiko, the woman who defeated Japan's greatest swordsman, began to take root in every heart that witnessed that day, and none of them would ever forget the sound of her single wooden strike that echoed like thunder through the soul of the proudest warrior in the land. The air inside the dojo felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Hayato stood frozen, his sword still lying on the floor, his heart pounding in his chest, louder than the thunder outside. The students watched in complete silence, their faces pale and eyes wide. They had just witnessed the impossible. The greatest swordsman in Japan had lost. Not to a warrior, not to a master, but to a quiet woman with a wooden sword. Aiko stood in the center of the room, her posture straight, her breathing calm. She looked neither proud nor afraid. She only looked at her wooden blade as if it were something fragile, something sacred. The rain outside grew louder, drops tapping against the wooden walls like 1,000 tiny drums echoing through the hall. Hayato finally knelt down, his hand trembling as he picked up his sword. The blade still gleamed, but to him it no longer felt alive. It felt empty, heavy, like a mirror showing him his own weakness. He looked up at Aiko and asked in a voice that barely held steady, "Who taught you that?" Aiko looked at him quietly for a long moment, then said softly, "My master, the same master who once taught you." The students gasped. Hayato's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" he said, his voice rising in disbelief. But Aiko simply turned her gaze toward the old calligraphy scroll hanging above the wall, the one with the faded words written by the founder of the dojo, words that said, "Strength without spirit is only noise. You once trained here, did you not?" she asked, her tone gentle. Not accusing, Hayato's lips parted as memories rushed through his mind. Years ago, when he was young and eager, he had trained under Master Renji, the same man who now taught Aiko. Back then, Hayato had been proud and impatient. He had wanted only victory and fame. He left before finishing his lessons to prove his strength across the land. He remembered now the day he left, his master's last words still echoing in his ears one day, "You will meet someone whose calm will defeat your blade." Aiko took a step closer, her wooden sword still in hand, her eyes soft yet strong. "Hayato, you chased power. Your sword is sharp, but your heart is restless. You move faster than wind, yet you do not listen to silence," she said. Her words pierced deeper than any cut Hayato could feel. Anger, shame, confusion, all swirling inside him. He gripped his sword tighter and stood up again, his pride refusing to surrender. His voice cracked as he said, "One strike is not enough. I want to face you again truly this time." The students looked at each other, unsure what to do, but Aiko only nodded once. "Very well," she said. The rain continued to fall outside. Lightning flashed across the open doorway, illuminating the dojo in brief silver light. Hayato took his stance, his feet planted firmly, his sword ready. Aiko stood still, her eyes never leaving his face. She seemed calm like a quiet lake, untouched by the storm around them. Then, it happened. Hayato moved first, faster than before, his blade cutting through the air like lightning, aiming straight for her shoulder. Aiko moved at the same moment, her body light and graceful. She stepped aside, letting his blade pass by. And in that same breath she struck back. Her wooden sword tapped the flat side of his blade, redirecting it slightly, and before anyone could blink, the tip of her weapon stopped just an inch from his throat. Gasps filled the dojo. One of the students fell to his knees, whispering. She stopped him again. She could have ended it. Aiko slowly lowered her sword and stepped back, her voice calm. "It is enough. You do not need to fight anymore," she said, but Hayato dropped to one knee, sweat dripping from his face. His sword clattering to the floor once more, he stared at her, unable to speak. His pride shattered, his spirit shaking. "You could have killed me," he whispered, his eyes searching hers. "Why did you stop?" "Because this was never about killing," she said. "It was about seeing the truth in yourself. You fight because you fear losing. You swing your sword to hide the emptiness inside until you let go of that fear. Your sword will never be free." The words hit him harder than any blade ever could. He felt the rains, cool wind enter through the open doors, brushing against his face, and he realized she was right. Every duel, every victory, every battle had been nothing more than noise. And now, for the first time, he heard silence. True silence. He bowed his head before her, something he had never done before. Not in all his years of fighting. The students watched in awe as the great Hayato, the undefeated swordsman, bent his knee before the woman who served tea and swept the floor. The woman who had just shown him the meaning of mastery. Aiko looked down at him and spoke softly. "Your master once said the greatest warrior is the one who no longer needs a sword. Perhaps now you understand." Hayato nodded slowly, rain dripping from his hair onto the wooden floor. He felt lighter somehow, though his chest still ached with the weight of realization. He whispered, "Thank you." Aiko turned away and walked toward the old shrine at the back of the dojo. She placed her wooden sword beside it and bowed deeply. The candlelight flickered softly across her face. She whispered something only she could hear, then stood again, her eyes gentle but far away, as if she was looking beyond the rain, beyond the mountains, beyond time itself. Hayato watched her go, his heart filled with something new, not defeat but respect, and for the first time in his life he understood what true strength meant. Not power, not speed, not fear, but peace. Outside, the rain began to slow, the clouds drifting apart, letting pale sunlight touch the wet earth. The air smelled fresh like a new beginning, and inside the quiet dojo, two souls who once followed different paths now stood in silence, both changed forever by the sound of one wooden strike. The rain had stopped at last, and the air around the dojo was soft and quiet, the sound of dripping water from the roof mixed with the smell of wet earth and old wood. Hayato still knelt on the floor, his sword resting beside him, his thoughts heavy as he watched Aiko kneel before the shrine, her hands folded together in prayer. The faint glow from the candles danced across her face, making her seem both real and unreal at the same time. The students stood at the edges of the room. None of them dared to move. They had seen what no one could ever believe: the greatest swordsman in Japan defeated twice by a woman who was supposed to be ordinary. Their hearts were full of confusion and awe, their minds spinning with questions they wanted to ask, but no one found the courage to speak. Hayato finally rose to his feet slowly, his knees weak, his pride gone. His eyes fixed on the quiet woman before him. He took a deep breath and spoke in a low, uncertain voice. "Tell me who you are. Tell me how you learned to move like that." Aiko turned her head slightly, her eyes calm, her expression peaceful. For a long time she said nothing. Only the wind answered, whispering through the paper walls. Then she looked at him and said, "I was once like you, a warrior, a student of this dojo long ago." "The students," gasped one, covered his mouth in shock. Hayato's eyes widened. "You trained here?" he asked, his voice trembling. She nodded. "Yes. Many years ago, when Master Renji still walked these halls, I was his student, just like you once were." Her words filled the room like thunder, though her voice was gentle. She stood up and walked toward the wooden rack where old practice swords hung covered in dust. She ran her fingers along the rough surface, her touch soft and full of memory. "Back then," she said, "I wanted to be the strongest. I wanted to protect the people I cared for. I trained every day from sunrise to sunset until one day I fought a duel with a fellow student." Her voice grew quieter. Her eyes lowered. "I wanted to win so much that I forgot control. I struck too hard and he never rose again after that. I could not bear to hold a sword. I could not sleep. I could not forgive myself. So I left. I became the caretaker of this dojo. I swept its floors and cleaned its rooms, but I never stopped training, not with my hands, but with my heart." Hayato listened, his chest tight, his fingers trembling. He had thought strength came from victory, but now he saw that her strength came from peace, from silence, from pain. She had turned her sorrow into wisdom. The students gathered closer, their eyes wet. Some with tears, some with awe. They had never known this story. They had never guessed that the quiet woman who served them tea had once been their master's greatest student. Aiko continued speaking, her voice calm but filled with feeling. "I learned that a sword is not meant to defeat others. It is meant to defeat what lives inside of us. Fear, anger, pride. Those are the true enemies. When I fought you, I did not fight to win. I fought to remind you of this truth." Hayato lowered his head, her words cutting deep into him, deeper than any blade he had ever felt all his life. He had sought power, but now he saw that power was not what made her strong. It was peace and forgiveness. He looked up and said softly, "You could have stayed the best. You could have been famous." She smiled faintly. "Fame is a shadow. It disappears with the sun." She said, "Peace lasts longer. I chose the path that keeps my soul steady, not the one that makes my name loud." The wind blew through the open door. The scent of rain carried with it the sound of distant bells from the village below. Hayato felt something he had not felt in years, a strange lightness, as if the weight of every duel, every victory, every death had begun to fade from his shoulders. He walked closer to her and bowed deeply, his voice humble. "Teach me." He said not to fight, but to understand. Aiko looked at him for a long moment, her eyes gentle and wise. Then she nodded. "If you wish to learn, you must first forget everything you think you know about the sword." She said, "Tomorrow at dawn, meet me in the courtyard. Bring no weapon." The students stared in amazement. The great Hayato was now asking to become her student. None of them could believe what they were seeing, but inside they felt hope. For the first time they saw that strength was not only in speed or power, but in kindness and calm. That night the dojo was quiet. Candles burned low. The sound of frogs echoed from the fields. Aiko sat alone near the old shrine, her hands resting on her knees. Her thoughts far away, she remembered the face of the student she had lost years ago. She whispered an apology to the wind, and then she smiled gently, because she knew he would forgive her now. Outside, Hayato sat under the porch. The rain dripping from the eaves, he looked at his sword lying beside him, and then at his reflection in the puddle. The proud warrior he once was seemed gone, replaced by someone humbler, someone new. He whispered to himself, "The greatest fight is within." The moon rose slowly, casting silver light over the dojo. The air was calm and still, and for the first time in many years, both Aiko and Hayato slept without the weight of battle pressing on their hearts. And though the night was silent, the dojo seemed alive, as if the spirit of the old master was watching, smiling, proud that his two lost students had finally found the lesson he had tried to teach them long ago, that the true sword lives not in the hand but in the heart. The morning came slowly over the mountains, the first rays of sunlight touching the wet rooftops and shining over the quiet village below. The dojo stood still in the mist, soft white clouds curling around its wooden beams, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to begin inside the courtyard. Hayato stood alone, his sword left behind in his room, his hands empty, his eyes fixed on the rising sun. Aiko appeared. From the doorway, her white kimono clean and simple, her hair tied neatly behind her head. She carried nothing in her hands, only a calm smile and a quiet voice. "You came," she said. Hayato bowed slightly. "I said I would, and I keep my word." Her eyes softened. "Words are easy to speak but hard to live," she said. "Come, we begin now." The courtyard was wide open, the earth still damp from last night's rain. Aiko moved to the center and knelt, her eyes closed, her breathing slow. Hayato followed, unsure what to expect. He had spent his life fighting, mastering every technique, every strike, every stance, yet now he was told to kneel with empty hands. Aiko spoke without looking at him. "When you hold a sword, your heart becomes narrow. You see only your opponent, only your blade, only the space where death lives, but when you hold nothing, your heart can see everything," she said. Hayato listened, his brow furrowed, his pride pushing against her words, but something inside him was curious, something quiet that he had never felt before. She told him to breathe with the wind, to listen to the leaves, to feel the earth beneath his knees. He tried at first, his mind restless, his thoughts bouncing like pebbles in water. He wanted to move. He wanted to strike. He wanted to win. But slowly, as the morning light warmed his skin, he began to feel the world around him. The sound of a bird calling from a branch, the scent of bamboo, the faint hum of life everywhere. Aiko opened her eyes and watched him in silence. She could see the tension in his shoulders. She spoke again. "You have fought too long with anger," she said. "Now fight with stillness." He looked at her, puzzled. "I do not understand," she smiled. "You will in time." She stood and began to move, her arms gentle and slow, tracing invisible lines in the air like waves on the ocean. Hayato followed her movements, awkward. At first his body used to sharpness, not softness. She guided him step by step, her voice quiet like wind through trees. "Each motion is a thought," she said, "each breath a choice when you move without anger. Your body listens when you move without fear. Your heart listens." Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, but neither of them noticed. The students watched from a distance, afraid to interrupt what looked more like a sacred dance than a lesson. The once proud swordsman now moved with humility, his movements uncertain but sincere. Aiko watched him closely, sometimes correcting his stance, sometimes letting him fail. Finally she stopped and said, "Enough for today." Hayato wiped the sweat from his brow, though he had not fought. He felt more tired than any battle he had ever faced. He looked at her and said, "I feel something, but I cannot name it." She nodded. "It is peace you have never known. And before that is why it feels strange." They sat under the shade of the porch. Aiko poured tea into 2 small cups. The fragrance rose with the steam, soft and earthy. Hayato held his cup in both hands, staring into the liquid as if searching for answers. Aiko spoke quietly. "I once believed power would protect me, it did not peace." Did he listen carefully, her words sinking into him like gentle rain on dry soil? She continued, "You think a sword is your strength, but it is only a tool. What gives it meaning is your heart. If your heart is unbalanced, your blade will always shake." Hayato lowered his eyes. "I have killed many people," he said, his voice shaking. "Sometimes they were enemies, sometimes just fools who stood in my way." Aiko looked at him without judgment then. "Perhaps now you will spend the rest of your life bringing peace where you once brought fear," she said. The wind blew softly through the open doors, carrying the smell of cherry blossoms from the nearby trees. Petals drifted into the courtyard and landed near their feet. Hayato watched one settle on his hand, so delicate it almost vanished when he breathed. He smiled faintly for the first time in many years. Aiko saw the smile and said, "You are learning not to fight against the world, but to move with it. That is the lesson of the blade. The sword is only as wise as the hand that holds it, and the hand is only as wise as the heart that guides it." The students who watched began to understand too. They saw their master and their caretaker sitting side by side, not as warrior and servant, but as teacher and learner. The scene stayed with them like a dream. They would never forget as the sun began to set. Golden light covered the dojo. The sound of bamboo leaves rustling in the Breeze filled the air. Hayato stood once more. He bowed deeply to Aiko, his voice steady. "Thank you for showing me what I could not see," he said. She nodded quietly. "You are not done yet. Tomorrow you will hold the sword again, but this time you will not fight me. You will fight your own reflection." Hayato looked at her uncertain, but he accepted her words. He turned toward the sunset, his heart lighter, his mind clear for the first time in years. He felt no hunger for victory, only the quiet wish to understand. The evening fell softly across the mountains, the sky painted in pink and silver, the world at peace as the two figures remained in the dojo, one teaching without pride, the other learning without fear, and somewhere far above them, the spirit of their old master smiled, knowing that the lesson he had planted long ago had finally blossomed. The dawn came again, soft and silver, painting the mountains with light. The mist still hugged the valley like a sleeping spirit. The dojo stood, quiet but alive, the sound of bamboo leaves whispering in the cool breeze. Hayato stood barefoot in the courtyard, his eyes closed, his hands empty, his mind clear. He had trained with Aiko for 3 days without lifting a sword, yet he felt stronger than ever before, not in body but in heart. Aiko watched him from the doorway, her gaze gentle, her posture straight. She could see how much he had changed, the proud warrior, who once walked like fire, now moved like water. His spirit calm and still. She stepped outside and joined him. The sound of her steps light against the wooden board, she spoke softly. "Today is your last lesson." Hayato opened his eyes and bowed. "I am ready." She nodded and walked to the rack where the swords rested. She took down the wooden blade and handed it to him. It was the same one she had used when they first fought. He held it carefully, feeling the weight, not of wood but of meaning. She said quietly, "Face your reflection. The true enemy lives within, not in front of you." He turned toward the pond that lay beside the courtyard. The surface of the water was still a perfect mirror, showing his own face. He raised the wooden sword slowly. The wind brushed his hair. His reflection stared back at him, strong yet uncertain. Aiko's voice drifted through the air. "Fight not to win, but to understand," she said. Hayato breathed deeply. His arms moved, his stance steady, his movements smooth. He swung once through the empty air, then again. Each strike soft yet full of control. His reflection moved with him. 2 Hayatos, one real, one mirrored, both learning from each other. The students watched in silence, their hearts full of wonder. They saw the great swordsman practicing like a humble